this is probably the best time to become a police officer. The recession is beginning to get better. I think in the next year or two, maybe 3, we're going to come out of the recession. That's going to coincide with a wave of police officers of my generation. We're all hitting our mid-50s, and there's going to be a lot of retirements. There was massive police hiring done in the late 70s and early 80s. We're all getting ready to retire. So those two things are going to come together about the same time. I think this is the best time to become a cop right now. Getting a realistic view about what police work is, what different departments do, I think is the most important thing. The people we lose oftentimes leave because their view of law enforcement came from television, where 20 years worth of excitement is packed into 1 hour, yeah. And all the problems you confront can be solved in an hour, and that's just not real life. I've heard law enforcement described as hours and hours of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. And so the reality of police work is it's not as fun as it looks on TV, and yet it's more fun in some ways than you could ever convey in film. One of my memories that I've always found hard to describe to people is when I've gone out with the SWAT team before we're going to do a high-risk search warrant. We usually hit the house at 5 or 6 in the morning when everybody's asleep. Right. And so you will have your briefing at 3 or 4 in the morning, and there's just something about getting a whole bunch of cops together, the smell of coffee, the smell of donuts. We have donuts. But there's something about the camaraderie of getting everybody together. Everybody's nervous and excited, and everybody knows there could be gunfire, there could be bad stuff, and yet every one of us is just chomping at the bit to get in there and do it. I don't think you can convey that in a TV show. I don't know how you can do that. Yeah. But I'll tell you, riding a desk now, that's one of the things I really miss is a pre-mission briefing and getting ready, and the combination of fear and excitement. People have said cops are adrenaline junkies. That's absolutely true. I'll tell you the thing. One of the things that bothered me and still haunts me is the first time I arrested a guy for rape. And this was very early, my first year that I was working the street. And a girl who was 13 and a half, 14 years old was picked up by a guy. He took her way out into the woods, Mud Mountain Dam, and raped her. And she was able to get away from him before he killed her. And I was able to track this guy down and arrest him myself. There was a lot more involved, obviously, but that's the short version. And the whole time I was investigating this case, I was full of rage, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on this guy. And I thought, I'm going to get the cuffs on this guy, I'm going to take him to jail, and justice is done. And I was literally quivering. I couldn't wait to arrest this guy till I got my hands on him. And he wasn't as big as she had described him. He was a pathetic excuse for a human being, frankly. To a 13-year-old girl, he seemed big and powerful. But to me as an adult, he seemed like a pathetic piece of human flesh. And as I was interviewing him, I realized he was slightly mentally disabled, terribly mentally ill. And all of a sudden, this want for vengeance started to crumble, because this guy was a mess of a human being. He was still a terrible person. He did a terrible thing. But there were reasons he did that probably were beyond his control. And I just remember going home that night so frustrated, because I thought, wait a second, this bad thing happened and I was going to go out and make it right. But I didn't fix anything, because now I come to realize there are a lot of people in the world like that out there. And it isn't as easy as I thought, that there's good guys and there's bad guys, and you go get the bad guys and you punish them. It doesn't work that way. And I think if you talk to anybody who's been in law enforcement for a long time, deep down, that's the thing that gets very frustrating, is the lines aren't that clear. The thing that I have enjoyed about being sheriff, there's a lot that I haven't enjoyed, but one of the things I have enjoyed is I can make things happen. I can get people's attention. I can get information out there. And so I have used the bully pulpit at the sheriff's office to talk about mental illness and to talk about the fact that there are a lot of mentally ill people out in the community that are victims, and they're victimizing people. And as a society, we've completely turned our back on the topic of mental illness. When you look at people who are homeless out on the street, we're doing a terrible job of dealing with that. So what I'm finding very satisfying and not disillusioning is that we can make these things better. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a long time. I've been working on a piece of federal legislation for 3 years to change our federal policy about Medicaid. When we book somebody into jail, if they're on Medicaid, which most people we book are eligible for Medicaid, all of a sudden the federal government stops paying for their medical care and cuts them off. So what that does is it puts the burden for paying for all that on the local agency. So the local sheriff's office ends up paying all those medical bills for somebody who may be mentally ill, severely medically compromised. And then when they're released from jail, their lifeline to mental health and medical services has now been cut. And it takes a tremendous amount of work to get it reconnected. So that's one example of part of the system that is broken and that I'm actually making some progress getting fixed. And so those are the things that keep me going. Our procedural justice training that I'm working on, probably one of the most important things I'll do for the law enforcement profession is to help get this training put together in a way that's credible for our police officers and give them better skills for dealing with people. So those things are very satisfying, and that's how you fight the frustration and the disillusionment, especially when my kids were growing up at home. I would have to go home, divorce myself from law enforcement and just focus on my family. And I kind of looked at that as a little oasis. You know, I've got 2 great kids, I've got a wonderful husband, we have a normal life, and I had to really force myself to pay attention and stay engaged in that. Because if you don't have that to balance off, you go crazy. And all the cops I've known that have really had a hard time dealing with the bad things they see on the street, they didn't have that counterbalance. You know, I think some of this may go back to being raised with 6 boys. And my family's very competitive. 2 of my older brothers are pilots. A couple have become cops. But we were raised to be very competitive. And I think having that sense of competitiveness inside, I'm not going to give up. And so I see something that's broken or that's not working. And to me, you know, it's a competition. Can I fix it? Can I get in there and make it better? And that's really, I think that's how you keep from getting frustrated and just walking away or giving up. The concept of giving up is not something I've ever been willing to even consider. There's got to be a resolution to things, and I think as I get older, I'm learning to recognize that there may be more than one way to resolve things. I think that comes with maturity. But I think the underlying competitive nature that I was raised with probably makes a difference. There's a couple that are kind of burned in there. I think probably the most dramatic one is when I was pregnant and working the streets. I was about 4 months along, and we had a little boy drown in White Center. And I will never forget his legs, his shoes, the little brown corduroy pants he was wearing when they finally pulled him out of the water. And I just remember where I live, we live on a small lake. And when that happened, I went home and told my husband, we got to sell the house and move. There's no way my kid's going to be raised near water, because I don't want to see those little brown corduroy pants and those little shoes laying on the edge of the water again. And that picture haunted me for years and years and years. Neither one of my sons have ever worn brown corduroy pants. And my grandchildren, if I have them, will never have those brown corduroy pants. And I just remember the little boy's mother was not She was a teen mom, way in over her head, and I just remembered that little boy never had a chance. But to see, I'll never be able to get that picture out of my head of that little boy. I have some others that are really graphic that I just wouldn't even want to talk about. But those are the ones that you can't erase. You know, they're there forever. I remember there was one particular scene. It was a guy who committed suicide. He blew his head off with a shotgun, and I walked into the scene, and you know, there's brain matter all over the walls. And I remember saying to myself, "Okay, this is just think of this as special effects, and you're just going to walk through there." And I was really, that was probably the first time I was able to really physiologically distance myself. And so I walked through and did the crime scene processing, and it was great. I thought, okay, this is really good. I'm just doing what I need to do. This isn't bothering me. And then I walked upstairs, and there is his sobbing wife standing at the top of the stairs, and she had been upstairs asleep, and he had gone down the stairs and blown his head off. And I looked at her, and then it all came crashing down. You know, I could just feel myself start to fall apart again. I thought, you know, to this guy, you son of a bitch, why did you do this? How could you have done this to her in this house? You could have done this some other place and time. She had to walk downstairs at 3 o'clock in the morning and find her husband with his head blown off. And I just remember at that point, I went from very antiseptic, very detached from the scene, to just rage for this guy who had just killed himself. I can still call up the picture in my memory, but it doesn't have, the emotions aren't attached to it. And so that's probably the line of demarcation when I can remember actually feeling that. I remember sometimes in very dangerous situations where everything went into slow motion. And I was confronting two fellows that just committed an armed robbery. And they were coming down the street. I was in a patrol district with no backup. And I remember when I saw the car, and I knew, this is it. I've got these two guys. One has a sawed-off shotgun, one has a .357. Holy cow, what am I going to do? And my brain switched into slow motion. And I felt like I had all the time in the world to think through, position your car, get the engine block, you know, all these things. And the actual felony stop itself just was quiet and slow. And as soon as I got them cuffed up and in my car, I walked up to the pickup truck, and there's a sawed-off shotgun and a .357. And as soon as I saw them, the bad guys are cuffed up, then, you know, physiologically I started shaking. It's like, okay, the reality is hit. But there was something very comforting, because I knew, you know, when you're in this moment of extreme danger, your brain's going to switch, and it's going to go to that quiet, slow place where you have time to think. And it's not scary at that point. It's more scary in hindsight when you go back and say, holy cow, you know, if these guys could have just chosen to pull out the sawed-off shotgun and have a shootout. They didn't. But it's you learn to sort of manage your brain and manage your physiology. But you have to do it a couple of times to trust that that's going to happen. I guess I would just say to people thinking about going into law enforcement, it really is as fun as you think it's going to be. And it's much more rewarding. For me, it was a lot more rewarding than I thought it was going to be. You go home at the end of the day on most days feeling like I did something good. I did something that mattered in somebody's life. And there's not a lot of professions where you can go home at the end of the day and say that. So it's an honorable profession, and I'm real proud to have been in it.